We're here today at the Greenback Community Center with 6 different people who have been here for a little while. And so at first, I would like you just to introduce yourself and tell me what community that you're from.
Ronnie Hudson. I grew up in Greenback and was born here in 1948.
So just tell me a little bit about your family and life growing up.
Okay. Well, my dad was born in Loudoun County, down in what is now called Centersville. And my grandfather Hudson had a store there right where now, off of 95, there is a store there now. It was the Greenways country store, but my grandfather's store was across the road, 95 from there. And my grandmother was a Bales, and she grew up in that area. And they were there, ran the store and had a farm, and took from 1921 till 32, or during the Depression. And they lost the store, and the farm had there was a lot of people around there that worked in the marble quarries over in Meadow. And my granddad fed him till he ran out of money. And he lost the farm. And then my mom's family were Dixons, originally from over at Trigonia. And my grandmother Dixon was a Mills from down in the river. And that the Mills farm was taken by the TVA when they did the TVA program. But my grandmother and grandfather Dixon had bought just before the Depression began, right down here at the corner of Morganton Road and not Peterson Lane, what's the name of the road?
Jackson.
No, right down here that goes to the Morganton Church. I guess that's Morganton Church Road.
Mm-hmm.
They lived right in that corner, but they had just bought it in like 1928. So my granddad, what he did, they had the farm, and he walked the railroad to Meta and worked at the brick plant. But they lost that farm during the Depression, and so an insurance company had bought the Hudson farm down in Centersville. So they came to my grandparent Dixon's and told them to said, "Well, just told my grandparents take your $4 and move down on that farm and look after it, and the Depression will be over someday, and we'll give you first choice to the farm." So the farm they did, and then when my grandparent Dixon's passed away, my father and his brother bought the 106 acres of the farmland and did not buy the house from the rest of the heirs. And the family and my sister and I are 3rd generation owning the land.
So all of your family is from over here in...
Oh yes. Judy says she and I met in 1948 in the church nursery, the Greenback Presbyterian Church. I don't remember, but she does. We go there now. Judy and I were married there. Our children were baptized there. We're just Greenback, and when Judy and I married in 1974, we could not find a place that we felt we could afford here, so we moved up off of Old Niles Ferry.
Suburbs.
Pretty close to Mr. Cocker there. Yeah, we're on the right side of 411 and his home's on the left. But Judy can fill in more about I lived right in town. I remember we played tag, up and down where the drugstore is, the old hardware, the buildings, and once in a while we got in trouble because we would run over someone. But it was a really fun time. And one of the other fun things I remember was it would have been in the middle 60s, a few years, Greenback had a wagon train, horses and mules and covered wagons. And then starting Greenback, and it would go around through Friendsville area, and it'd wind up down in Glendale and stay one night, and then we'd come back up along the river and back to Greenback. And that was a lot of fun. But when it started on Friday, all day they called it horse trading day. So the people there traded horses, I guess. I don't remember that, but the big thing was they had square dance on Friday night and blocked off Greenback. Fred Phipps called square dance, and it was a big deal.
Yeah.
One character that none of us have talked about, I think, in Greenback was Mr. Long, Clarence Long.
Blacksmith.
He was the blacksmith.
Okay.
And one of the stories about him was he always got up real early in the morning and he made his own mule shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And John might remember it was somebody from down towards
Georgia. That's who lived in the Maxwell out there. Kirkland's.
Yeah.
Evans, Georgia, and Norman. Rented 3 rooms up over there in the Maxwell. We bought a little place. I could talk.
Yeah, that was, somebody walked in one day and picked up one of the shoes that Mr. Long had just turned, and it was still hot. So he picked it up, and he threw it down real fast, and they said, Mr. Long said, "Hey, was that shoe still hot?" And he said, "No, it just doesn't take me long to look at a horseshoe."
Ronnie, tell me about your school experiences, and what do you remember most about school as a student?
As a student, well, let's see, I was there all 12 years. Miss Cooper was my English teacher in high school. I did not have Mr. Cooper that he talked about. Mr. Hinton was our vocational teacher then. But we had my first grade teacher was Miss Best, and second grade was Miss Seaton. Third grade was Miss Rowland. Fourth grade was Miss Thomas, and fifth grade was Miss Thomas. And sixth grade was Miss Jones. Seventh grade was Miss Chapman. Eighth grade, Miss Black. And then, of course, in high school, we had people, that some that had grown up in Greenback and some hadn't, and we...
Did anyone make a great impression on you that you'd say changed your life?
Well, I guess one of the big things I remember was in Miss Black's class in 8th grade, and a boy smarted off to her, and she slapped him and knocked him out on the floor and said, "Get back up and sit down and don't talk like that to me again." That was a real
Big impression.
Yeah, and that eagle right there, he made that in memory of, which one of the Tuck boys now is
Hubert?
that? Hubert Tuck. And we always heard he was early in the Vietnam era. He was in the Navy and he was killed on a ship. A turret exploded, and we heard that he was one of the first soldiers that died in the Vietnam War. And I did look it up, and I found out, there had been, he might have been one of the earlier ones when war was declared, but not the first military person to lose their life.
And that was Hubert?
Hubert Tuck. I think it was Hubert Jr., wasn't it?
It is,
Yeah, Hubert Tuck Jr. He went to our Presbyterian church. He did the Ten Commandments, cut them out.
Yeah.
Wood and on the wall. He has done a lot in the community.
Which church made an impact on you? Ronnie, we'll start with you.
Me, it'd be Greenback First Presbyterian, because that's where Judy and I met in the nursery, and we still go. And, yeah, and that's it. And other things as we've taught, like Miss Kerr, she was our teacher in,
5th grade probably.
I did not have her in school in 5th grade, but when we were about that age, she was our class, and Judy and I discovered, after we'd been married a few years, Miss Moulter used to come to school, and you could say Bible verses and earn a testament or a Bible, or on that. And Judy and I, after we were married a while, my mom gave me my Bible, and her mom gave her Bible that we'd had, and we both opened in that, and we both accepted Christ the same day.
In Miss Kerr's class.
Yeah.
Miss Kerr's class.
She gave us the opportunity, but had us all bow our heads, so we didn't know the others had
Yeah,
done
we
it.
didn't know.
So, but that was
Yeah,
something that
that-
came out later.
Yeah.
That was Miss Kerr.
You would never hear her.
And she lived right out here beside the church and had a big house, the Kerr home. And I think it was, it burned. And what I remember about the house being on fire, of course, we lived in town, was run out there, and Kirby Shates was up on the 2nd floor throwing furniture out the window. One of the great church stories for our congregation was Uncle John Woods and Aunt Nettie. They always drove that old car to church, and the children, after church, we were not allowed to go outside and play till Uncle John left the parking lot. Yeah. And all these people know why that was true.
Tell me about your professional life. What jobs did you have?
I went to college at the University of Tennessee, and upon graduation I worked 2 years in industry in Lenore City, and then I was offered a job teaching mathematics at Greenback High School by James Lawrence McGee, the principal then, and he's the teacher I should have said had a lot to do with me, because he taught, when I started high school, he was the math teacher, and Miss Cooper had moved up. We had her in Spanish, I think, and I don't know what
Yeah,
else.
she taught Spanish and algebra and geometry and you name it, she could teach it.
Yeah, and I didn't have her in any of the math, but I had Spanish. But I taught
Hank?
at Green.
Hank?
Hank, yeah, Hank. But I taught at Greenback 30 years. I started out in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. Yes, we lived just right in town from my birth to 4th grade, and then Mom and Dad lived down 95, just a block down there on Calhoun Circle. But I remember, the stores I remember was the A&B, Mr. Brooks. He had an artificial hand,
Got it blowed off with a
Yeah.
spark plug.
You know, I didn't really know how he lost it, but he had an artificial hand. And then Clarence Long had this store that was right by the drugstore, which is the museum now. He had a store there, and he had been the Greenback blacksmith, but he retired from blacksmithing and had a store there.
What kind of stuff did they sell?
I remember he had canned goods,
Bread's about how we bought
and
that.
it was canned goods and bread. And I remember my dad had a milk cow, and once in a while we would carry extra milk up there and put it in the cooler, and he'd sell it. And we had chickens there at home, and as Bill said, I remember killing chickens, and my job was after they removed the head and the chicken quit flopping around, I was supposed to go pick it up and bring it back to Mom to put in the boiling water and so forth and finish out the work and go. But I was always afraid, because every time I went and bent over to get the chicken, it'd flop again and it just scared me to death. And we traded things at Mr. King's. I remember when I was young, as Bill said, we bought, I know, some shoes there and some clothing. And I remember Mr. King, I bought lots of baseball cards from him. And he gave me a box one time, because I got the last pack out of the cards. And that box, on the back, they had a 5x7 picture of a baseball player at the time. And the box he gave me had Mickey Mantle on it. And so I kept the box. And then after Judy and I were married, we were getting ready to go on vacation. And I went to a card show in Knoxville and sold that card for $250. And then, as everybody said, Mr. King would have turned over in his grave if he knew he gave me $250.
Yes, he would have.
Yeah. And we did some shopping over at the IGA on 411. And but then later, you know, when, as you said, Mom started driving when I was, I don't know, 6, 8 years old, and then lots of time would go to Marion.
It was big doings then.
Yeah, big doings go there, and the white store, because they had green stamps, and sometimes Mom would let me have them to get a new baseball bat or a new glove or something like that, the stamps.
But they got
They
rid of the mischief.
started Little League Baseball, was around 55, 56, because I know the first time I got to play, I was 8. And it was here on the school property, right over there next to the gym, because I remember the brick gym that was there. They were building it one summer, and if you hit the ball far enough, it went over the brick wall and down into before the roof, and I was on the gym, you got a home run. So but we did that. We had elementary basketball teams, and of course then high school basketball. Football began in Greenback in 1958, and Joe Quirk was the first football coach. He and Al Crop, and but the first team was 1958 for high school. And then we had quite a few that families had horses, you know, and they had community fair, and you know, a lot of the children showed cattle, and then see, what else did we do? I'm trying to think. Our Dr. Crop, who was preacher at the Presbyterian Church at that time, he had an old, we would call it a van, 15-passenger van. I don't remember if it had seats in it, but one night a week he'd take all he could pile in up to Maryville to the roller skate. There was a lot to do. Of course, the drugstore stayed open till 9. Yeah, after 9.
Really?
Because the work bus came through here, and it would stop, and the hours of the shifts at Alcoa were 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., and then 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay.
So the bus going, quote, quote, for the workers that work 10 at night, 6 in the morning, came through at Greenback and stopped at 8:30. And some of the people were people here that would get on it, but they would run in usually, and we'd been there because we lived right in town. They'd run in and get them something to eat and then get back on the bus, but they had to be in Maryville by then.
What year did the drugstore go out of business? Roughly.
It's still running.
Well, as a
Yeah,
diner
as a drugstore.
now, but as a
Yeah.
The
drugstore.
last,
Changed to the diner.
yeah, the
But I
last
still call it the drugstore.
family who owned that was Ray and
Ray Smith.
Ray Smith
Marilyn
and
Smith.
Ray and Marilyn Smith. And Ray was
Was
a
a
pharmacist. And they moved here, and she was the diner, and he was the pharmacist.
That would have been what, 80s?
Yeah, I would think 80s
Yeah.
to 90s. And, well, there was 2 guys who walked regularly the road, and their nicknames was Sad and what was his brother?
Remember his name, Hedrick, is their last
Yeah,
name.
they were
is
Hedrick. Sad and
Lonely, we call him.
did you?
Lonely.
Sad and lonely. That might have been it. But they
remember,
walked
by the way.
everywhere. Yeah, and
But when they walked, they'd walk with their
yeah,
head
their
down.
head down all the time. And
They
they
came
lived
from the Morganton.
Oh my
Morganton
goodness,
area.
they came down
and
from below our house sometimes, even
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Jackson
Yeah.
Ferry.
And they would
Yeah.
sit over there in that picture window at Uncle John Bess's store there
Yeah.
on the corner, and they just sat there for hours. But then they'd come in Mr. King's store when I worked over there, and every once in a while and buy a little something. But then they'd walk. I reckon they went back home. They
They
went to
walked,
start. Yeah, and then what was the Charlie Hammondtree's? Jess and them's brother, was Charlie. Charlie. And he would walk. He'd come to Greenback too. I remember
Yeah,
him.
he
quite
walked.
well.
Well, and there was a man. His name was Ed Wilson. He lived down
Ed-
95.
Ed, that's who I
Edgar
was
Wilson.
thinking.
Yeah, Edgar Wilson. And he always walked, and but he went to the Presbyterian Church, and like Judy's family, would take him home a lot of Sundays. He's ridden thousands of miles with my dad going to cattle sales across the South, but he was at church every Sunday. And at Christmas, he always gave every child a silver dollar. And
Yeah, I remember him.
that he wasn't what I'd call a character, but he was just special.
And what was his name again?
Edgar Wilson. Well, I think in the elementary school particularly, my mom was probably the main influence, and if I got lazy in my schoolwork, she would tell me, said, yeah, you just go ahead and do that, sis. You can just move down there, the quote, the bad part of the Greenback area was the Gap of the Ridge. And, it was pretty rough, I guess. There was shootings on the weekend and things like that. She said, you just move down there to the Gap of the Ridge and live down there. And that would get me going again, and that's what I told somebody a few years ago. Now the Gap of the Ridge is where they're building yachts. And they said, well, did you ever bring that up to your mom? And I said, no, she'd have whipped me. And, but I know in high school, we have mentioned him before, I know who was the most influence on that part of my education was Hank McGee. He started teaching here at Greenback, and my favorite area of study is mathematics, and that's what he taught. And he was a great teacher. Of course, learned a lot from my dad and mom and uncles and aunts, cousins. But I think Greenback was a great place to grow up. Of course, as Judy said too, if you get right down to it, we called everybody aunt and uncle. So yeah, and just if you got in trouble, it seemed like one of those aunt and uncles always knew about it. And I was old enough to drive then, but somebody'd say, well, why don't you drive faster? I said, because before you can get home in Greenback, whatever you do, they know it. You go to the door and they say, why were you doing so-and-so? And you just, it was a great place to be. Dr. Croft, a good story about him and the Indians is my dad and uncle had a small tobacco patch right here between the churches when he was here, and of course I was a teenager. I think we weren't teenagers then, hardly were we. But anyway, Dr. Croft, we were putting out tobacco, and he came over one day and said, could you come up to the manse and put some tobacco plants in the flower beds? So, my dad and uncle were there, and I was looking around, and they said, yeah, just go take some up there and put them out for him. Well, so I took him up, and we went all around the house, and he had 15 tobacco plants in there. And then it went on, when we fertilized it, I had to go up and fertilize his tobacco. And then when it got up tall, you had to go top it. You had to take out the suckers. And then, and then when we cut the tobacco, we cut it and then hung it. It was like Jerry Mazingo and Darrell Brookshire and I, we did it. We all went to church together. He had like 5 sticks that had different stalks on it. We hung it up in an outbuilding there at the church, and then it turned out what he did with that, this Edgar Wilson we talked about, he helped him make it into plug tobacco, and he sent it to those Indians in North Dakota.
In North Dakota?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And the next year, Miss Croft,
Estelle,
we started to begin the tobacco patch again. That year she came down and said there will be no tobacco in my flower beds this year.
That's good.
Growing up in the community, in the church, you were close to everyone, and I was lucky enough to teach here for 30 years. And one of the best things for me is, Judy, I'll be in town buying groceries, and we'll be talking in one aisle here, and you'll hear somebody say, Mr. Hudson, I hear your voice, but I don't know where you're at. And just the children I got to teach, they're just great. And it's just great to know it's a great community. Everyone loves each other and cares for each other. And like Willie Clyde, I know it's based on belief in God that we all have. Too, Uncle John Woods was not a very good driver. And also Mr. Sam McCall was not a very good driver. He was the one, he had his foot on the brake all the time driving, his brake lights were on. Well, one day, one was going like from west to east out the street by the co-op, and the other one's coming east to west. Well, they got right in front of the co-op building, and they hit each other. So they stopped their cars, got out, both looked, and they noticed everything was fine. Neither one was going fast enough to hurt the other. So they got in, one drove on out that way, one out the other way. They got out here to the gas station where the stoplight is, hit each other again.
They weren't very good drivers.
No, they weren't.